It's the most famous haunted house in the world. And tonight, Primetime takes you deep inside the Amityville Horror. 6 brutal murders, horrors you couldn't imagine, and a Halloween legend that will make your blood boil. Could it all be real? What really lies beyond this door? Next, go inside with Primetime, if you dare.
A Halloween ghost story.
It's the most haunted house in the world.
The truth about the Amityville Horror.
I can hear my children's beds overhead of me slamming up and down on the floor, and I can't get up to help them.
Tonight, what really happened inside this house? The one immortalized in the movie. 6 people murdered inside. The legend grew when another family moved in and then suddenly fled. Terrified, they say, of something eerie and powerful unleashed inside. Others felt it too.
As I stood in the middle of that room and looked around, I said, I hope this is as close to hell as I'll ever get.
But was it all a giant hoax? Elizabeth Vargas with The House in Amityville.
From ABC News, this is Primetime Thursday with Diane Sawyer and Charles Gibson.
Good evening. Diane and I are delighted that you have chosen to join us on this Halloween night for another edition of Primetime Thursday.
And tonight, for Halloween, we investigate the facts behind one of the most enduring ghost stories of our time, the Amityville Horror. Like the best ghost stories, this one begins with something that really happened. 6 people murdered inside a house in suburban New York. But what happened next is what truly gave rise to the legend of the haunted house in Amityville. Tonight, Elizabeth Vargas has new details about the murders and first-hand accounts of other strange, unexplained things that happened inside the house in Amityville.
This is it, the Dutch colonial house in Amityville, New York, where so many strange and terrible things happened, both real and perhaps imagined. Things that caused this family to flee nearly 27 years ago, leaving everything they owned behind. Weeks after the family left, a legion of Ghostbusters came here to investigate the family's claims of a frightening and demonic possession.
It was like a psychic slumber party. The idea was we were going to spend the entire night in the house.
Reporter Laura DiDio was there. Pictures that March night in 1976 show the crowd moving from room to room, trying to pick up ghostly vibrations. One of the psychic researchers is Lorraine Warren.
The overwhelming feeling was horrible depression, sadness.
In the middle of that night, a group seance. Suddenly, one psychic becomes visibly upset.
Yeah, and it's something that comes at you and makes your heart speed up.
And something else peculiar. In a series of time-lapse photos, the upstairs landing appears empty in every picture except one. Look in the corner on the left.
The face of what appeared to be a little boy peering out from one of the bedrooms.
Lorraine Warren says one room in the house seemed especially strange.
As I stood in the middle of that room, I said, I hope this is as close to hell as I'll ever get.
The legend of Amityville had begun. But the real-life horror actually started 16 months earlier on a Halloween night. Ronald DeFeo Sr., his wife, and their 5 children lived here. The father and his eldest son, Ronnie Jr., had a history of violent fights. And that Halloween night, they were at a breaking point.
He and his father had a fight in the basement.
Harvey Aronson was a reporter for a local newspaper.
And his father punched him in the face, and he was all bloody.
2 weeks later, Ronnie Jr. burst into the neighborhood bar.
He came, he opened the door, and he was screaming, come on, help me. Somebody shot my mother and father.
This is what police found. A body face down in each bedroom. Ronald Sr., his wife, and all 4 of their other children methodically shot at close range with a high-powered rifle. The first officer on the scene was Ken Groguski.
In all my years, I had seen a lot of deaths, but nothing quite as gruesome as this was.
Within days, police would arrest 23-year-old Ronnie Jr. and charge him with killing his entire family. Ronnie would plead not guilty by reason of insanity. He claimed he heard strange voices in the house and that he was compelled to kill.
The jury rejected the plea and sentenced Ronnie DeFeo to 6 life terms in prison. And that probably would have been the end of the Amityville horror story had it not been for George and Kathy Lutz, who 1 year later were looking to buy a home.
It was a dream come true. Kathy walked in and she had this smile on her face that was, like, this is the best she's ever seen.
With its terrible history, the price was low. The Lutzes bought the sprawling 3-story home called High Hopes for $80,000.
Did you know when you were looking at the house that there had been 6 murders there a year before?
We went home and we sat around as a family and talked about it for quite a while. And it was decided that that would be okay.
But the house's history did unsettle them enough to have a priest, Father Pecoraro, seen here with the Lutz's children, bless the house. Lutz says the priest swore that in one room he felt an unseen hand slap him and heard a loud voice warn him.
He heard the words "get out" very strongly. He became ill. He had flu-like symptoms. His hands bled openly for a while.
The priest reportedly has since died, but within days, Lutz says his family also began to notice strange things about their new home.
There were odors in the house that came and went. There were sounds. The front door would slam shut in the middle of the night.
Lutz says the house was inexplicably cold. He says he kept the fireplace burning night and day in a futile attempt to stay warm. The story of what happened to the Lutz family would later become a best-selling book and a blockbuster movie, The Amityville Horror. It dramatized the Lutz's story, the swarms of flies in the room where the priest claimed to have heard a voice, the front door flying off its hinges, and Lutz's constant chill, and lots of slime oozing everywhere. Lutz says while the movie is at points very exaggerated, all of it is based on reality.
What about this slime that we saw so much of in the movie?
The Hollywood movie? The slime was not out of the walls either. It was like gelatin, like drops of gelatin on the carpet going from room to room. And you would get up in the morning and that would be there.
Lutz says every day brought new horrors, but that the last night in the house was the worst.
I'm laying in bed. I'm unable to get up. There's no pressure on me. There's no force holding me down. I'm unable to move. I can hear my children's beds overhead of me slamming up and down on the floor. And I can't get up to help them.
How long did that last?
All night.
And you couldn't move?
No.
That night, like so many others, Lutz says he awoke at 3:15 in the morning, the same time of the DeFeo murders. He says what he saw next was frightening.
Kathy levitated and went across the bed.
Levitate? You mean her body just lifted right off the bed?
Yes. That's the hardest thing for people to accept.
Lutz says he and his family had finally had enough. The next morning, 28 days after moving in, the Lutzes made a run for it. These photos seem to show their haste. Closets are still full. Food is in the refrigerator. The children's toys all left behind.
If you and your family hadn't gotten out of the house, what do you think would have happened to you?
I really try not to think of what that might have become.
Clearly, you think it would have been something horrible.
Yes.
Lutz says when they left the house, things got better. But he began to wonder if whatever tormented his family inside the Amityville house had also driven Ronnie DeFeo Jr. to murder his family the year before.
We realized there was something so wrong there that it would be inhuman, it would be improper to just let him rot in jail and not try to help get him some kind of psychological help.
Lutz says he contacted DeFeo's attorney, William Weber, but at that point, Weber was primarily interested in writing a book.
There was various offerings from book companies to publish a book.
Weber called a press conference, and the Lutz's story soon became big news. Reporter Laura DiDio got in touch with George Lutz and offered to bring in those psychic investigators.
But look, you need to be put in touch with some credible people who can help you if this really happened, as you say it did.
So, who are you going to call? Lutz himself refused to set foot in the house, but with his permission, the psychic posse moved into the house for one night. The TV cameras captured no ghosts, but there is that one mysterious image in those time-lapse photos, the little boy on the left.
And there were no little boys in your group?
No. I mean, it looked like a ghost boy, okay? But you saw these two, eyes there. And that was sort of, oh, where'd that come from? That's a mystery.
A mystery caught on film. Or was it? A strange tale gets stranger still. A woman who says she's in touch with the dead comes to the house.
And the first thing she said, there's an Indian here.
Plus, the man who murdered his entire family reveals what really happened inside the house on Ocean Avenue that night.
We return now to Amityville, New York, and our Halloween tale. The Lutzes never set foot back inside the house after what they describe as a terrifying night. They say powerful, dark forces drove them from their home. And that's where Elizabeth Vargas picks up the story.
Soon after they flee the house on Ocean Avenue, George and Kathy Lutz meet with William Weber about writing a book. Weber was the attorney for Ronnie DeFeo, who murdered his entire family in the Amityville house.
They were very reserved about their experiences in the house. In other words, there was no ranting and raving going on.
But Weber says during the long evening, the Lutz's story got more elaborate with every bottle of wine.
I don't remember the number of bottles of wine that we had, but it certainly was more than 4. There was this give and take. And toward the end, we were creating ideas.
What do you mean, creating?
Creating. In other words, if you were talking about the green slime, well, why couldn't it have come from a demonic source?
But did he tell you he was making this up, or did he tell you that we also saw green slime?
He never told me he saw green slime.
So bottom line, do you believe the Lutz's story about what happened in those 28 days?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Because I know that they were making a commercial venture of this.
William Weber now says that this meeting wherein you described what happened to you at the house was more like a creative writing session over a few bottles of wine where you all sort of came up with concocted this great story, this great hoax.
We know what happened to us. And we remember.
The Lutzes rejected a book deal with Weber and instead agreed to write a book with author Jay Anson. The result, The Amityville Horror, a true story. It becomes a phenomenon, more than 6 million copies sold, and spawning the blockbuster movie. But Weber still wanted to write his Amityville book and hired Hans Holzer, professor of paranormal psychology and a self-styled world-famous ghost catcher.
They wanted me to look into what was really going on in that house.
In 1977, Holzer went to Amityville with a medium, someone who claims to be able to talk to the dead.
She went into the house, and the first thing she said, there's an Indian here. she then in trance, explained that the Indian chief was on a warpath because this was sacred ground. He was buried there, and anything on this land must be removed and the people must leave.
Holzer believes Ronnie DeFeo was possessed by the angry Indian spirit. The chief of the Montaukett tribe of Long Island told us there is no record of a burial ground on the land, but Holzer is adamant.
The Indian chief will be there until the house is destroyed, and one fine day it will burn down, and the land will be clean again.
For all the believers, Amityville also attracted legions of professional skeptics. Joe Nickel has made a career of examining haunted houses and said there's never been a documented case, and that includes Amityville. But Nickel has never been inside 112 Ocean Avenue. He has never even met the Lutzes.
Why are you so certain that you know what the truth is?
Amityville was everything you ever heard about and then some. It was some of this and some of that and a lot of demonic stuff thrown in, and even motifs that seemed to have been more or less stolen from the movie Exorcist, like floating up in the air off the bed. And so it just looked phony from the get-go.
What is your reaction to people who say, look, the Lutz family made up this entire tale to make money. This was something that they decided to do, to stage, so that they could sell a book and, wow, even make a movie?
Well, we could have done it better. We should have done it better if that was the plan.
All told, the Amityville horror book and movie netted the Lutzes about $300,000, they say. Not bad, but certainly not the multi-millions those with the rights to the book, movie, and all the sequels raked in. And the Lutzes gave up a lot along the way. Their home, their business, even their children were taunted, they say, when their story became known.
Do you wish you'd never bought the house at 112 Ocean Avenue?
There are times. And I've often wondered what my life would have been like. What if I'd made this decision instead of that?
So what are we to believe after nearly 3 decades? The Amityville horror has become a legend, compelling but elusive. We decided to make one more phone call to the man who was there at the very beginning.
Ronnie DeFeo was still serving those 6 life sentences in an upstate New York prison. In phone calls, he told Primetime that his parents were abusive and that on the night of the murders, he was drunk and high on heroin. As for those ghosts, he claims he lied and there were no voices commanding him to kill. There are tangible reminders of what happened in Amityville. A single gravestone with the names of Ronnie DeFeo's victims. The house on Ocean Avenue. No one who's lived here since the Lutzes has reported anything strange. And all those photographs inside the house. But no one has an explanation for this picture. Is it really an eerie-looking little boy? And if not, what is it?
What would you say to people who might not believe?
It's their right. I can't tell them what to think, what to believe. I can just say what I experienced.
The Amityville horror touched off a national fascination with haunted houses. In some places, they've been turned into huge attractions. Gallup polls show nearly 1/3 of all adults believe in ghosts. Nearly as many think you can talk to the dead. We'll have more on that later in our show. And if you'd like to talk to George Lutz about his former house in Amityville, you can chat with him online live tomorrow. And for details, go to abcnews.com.